Hello everyone, here is Afra Syab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended. Held on October-November 2021. Paper code is 0625 with variant 43. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1. A ship sails in a straight line between two ports. Figure 1.1 shows the speed time graph for the ship for the first 100 minutes of its journey between two ports. So here is a speed time graph. On the x-axis we have take time in minutes and on y-axis we have take speed in meter per second. Part A. Calculate the maximum acceleration during the first 100 minutes of the ship journey. So here we have to calculate the maximum acceleration. In the graph you can see that first the slope increases and then it becomes constant from 60 to 100 seconds. It means that from 60 to 100 minutes the speed is constant, so it has a constant slope. But 40 to 60 minutes the slope is increasing. So we have to find out the maximum acceleration, and acceleration is the gradient of speed time graph. I write here acceleration and gradient is also the slope of speed time graph, and it is equal to delta V by delta t, where delta V is change in speed and delta t is change in time. So we have to calculate the maximum acceleration, means that we have to first find out the portion where the slope change is maximum. So slope is increasing from 40 minutes to 60 minutes. So here slope is maximum. It means that the acceleration in this region is maximum. So we draw these points on the x-axis and y-axis. When I draw, it will meet the y-axis at some point, and we have to find out its value. Similarly, 60 minutes meet the y-axis at some point. So here we can see that one big box is equal to 5 meter per second. It means that small one box is equal to 0.5 meter per second. And the speed at 60 minutes is 15 meter per second, and we have to find out the speed at 40 minutes. It means the speed at this point. We have to calculate the speed at this point, and it is almost 6.75. I write here at this point speed is 6.75 meter per second. So when we find out the slope, it will be equal to V2 minus V1 over T2 minus T1. So V2 is 15 meter per second minus V1 is 6.75 divided by time is 60 and 40 minutes. So first of all we have to convert this minute into seconds. That's why I multiply it with 60. I write here 60, that is T2 multiply by 60 to convert this time into second, minus 40 multiply by 60. 40 is initial time, and to convert this minute into second I multiply it with 60, and it becomes as 15 minus 6.75 divided by 60 minus 40 multiply by 60, and acceleration comes to be 0.069. 0.069. The unit of acceleration is meter per second square. So the maximum acceleration is 0.0069. I write here 0.0069 meter per second square. Part B. Calculate the total distance traveled by the ship between time t is equal to 42 minutes and time t is equal to 100 minutes. Here we have to calculate the total distance covered by the ship. So going back to the graph. So 42 minutes is at this point. On x-axis, one big box is equal to 20 minutes and one small box is equal to 2 minutes. So at this point, time is 42 minutes. And at this point it is 100 meter. We have to calculate the total distance between 42 to 100 minutes. So we join first of all this point with the curve. So here we can see that if we join this point with this, I join it as so here we can see that it's a rectangle and there is a second rectangle and a triangle. So here we can see that it's the first rectangle. We have to find out the area under this rectangle and also have to calculate area under the second rectangle. And there is also a triangle whose area we also have to calculate. This is triangle. So the total distance between t is equal to 42 to 100 minutes is basically the area that is under this curve. So there are basically three shaded regions. One is region 1 and this is region 2. Third one is this triangle region 3. We have to calculate the area under this curve. So first of all we calculate the area of the region 3. It becomes to be for region 3, we can see that it's a rectangle, it's a triangle and the area of triangle will be equal to 1/2 base multiplied by height. So here we can see that at this point time is 60 minutes and at this point time is 42 minutes. So we just first of all convert this minute into second and it will be 1/2 60 minus 42, that is the time difference, multiplied by 60 to convert this time into minutes. And we also have to find out the corresponding speed. And at this point the speed is 15 meter per second and at this point it is 7.5. So it comes to be 15 minus 7.5, which is the speed, and it becomes as 1/2 18 multiplied by 60 multiplied by 7.5. So the area of the region 3 comes to be 1/2 multiplied by 18 and 60 and then with 7.5. This is the area of third region. We also have to calculate the area of first and second region. For that we can see that these are the rectangles and we have to find out the area of rectangle. It will be equal to base multiplied by height. For region 1, area will be equal to base multiplied by height. We can see that it is 100 and at this point the time is 42. So I write here 100 minus 42. These are in minutes. We have to convert into second. That's why I multiply it with 60. And the height is basically speed. So we can see from here that the speed at that line is 7.5 and initially it is 0. So it will be 7.5, which is the area of the first region. We also have to calculate the area of second region. So here we can see that in the second region, it starts from this point and end at this point. So at the final, the speed is 15, while at this point, the speed is 7.5. So at this position, the time is 100 and at this position, the time is 60. So I write here for region 2, area will be equal to, here base is 100 minus 60. And to convert this minute into second, multiply it with 60. And height is 15 minus 7.5. So 15 minus 7.5. It is almost equal to 7.5. And it comes to be 40 multiplied by 60 multiplied by 7.5. So in order to calculate the total distance traveled between this time, we just add all of these areas. So I write here total distance it will be equal to area of region 1 plus area of region 2 plus area of region 3. So for the first region, area is 100 minus 42, it is 18 multiplied by 60 multiplied by 7.5 plus for region 2, area is 40 multiplied by 60 and 7.5, and for region 3, it is 1 over 2, 18 multiplied by 60 and 7.5. 18 multiplied by 60 and 7.5. Here is plus sign. So the total distance comes to be 48,000 meter. I write here it will be 48,000 meters. Part C. At a point not shown on the graph, the acceleration of the ship is 0.087 meter per second square. The total mass of the ship and its passenger is 2.3 into 10 to the power 7 kg. Calculate the resultant force on the ship. Here we have to calculate the resultant force, and we know that F is equal to ma according to second law of Newton. F is equal to ma. Here mass is given, that is 2.3 into 10 to the power 7. 2.3 into 10 to the power 7, and acceleration is given, that is 0.00087. So the force comes to be 2.0 into 10 to the power 5. And the unit of force is Newton. So I write here 2.0 into 10 to the power 5 newtons. Part 2. Explain why the force on the ship due to the ship's engine is greater than the value you calculate in C part 1. So in this question we have to tell the reason that why the force on the ship due to the ship's engine is greater as compared to 2.0 into 10 to the power 5 Newton. So this force is basically greater because there must be the water resistance. And in order to overcome this water resistance, the ship has to produce some external force, some extra force. So this force that is due to the ship's engine must be greater as compared to that we calculate in part 1. I write here, there is a backward force due to the water resistance. That's why the force due to the ship engine is greater than 2.0 into 10 ki power 5 newtons. Question number 2. Figure 2.1 shows a simplified version of a gravity lamp. This apparatus is used to light a light-emitting diode without main electricity. So here is a figure 2.1 and there is a load of 12 kg and there are two straps on left and right hand side, and there is also the LED, that is light emitting diode. The load of 12 kg is raised to a height of 1.7 meter above the ground. The load is connected to a pulley system. The time taken for the load to fall to the ground is 1200 seconds. The load falls at the constant speed. The generator is connected to an LED. Part A. Calculate the rate of transfer of gravitational potential energy as the load falls to the ground. Here we have to calculate the rate of transfer of gravitational potential energy. So the rate of transfer is actually power. So we just can write as energy per unit time, that is the rate of transfer of energy, and it is equal to power. So here we have to calculate basically the power, that is the rate of transfer of gravitational potential energy. So here at the place of E, we use gravitational potential energy. I write here the rate of transfer of gravitational potential energy it is equal to mgh over T. Here mgh is the gravitational potential energy. Here mass is given, that is 12 kg. So I write here 12 multiplied by the value of G is 10 meter per second square, that is the acceleration due to gravity, and the height is given 1.7 meters. So height is 1.7 and time is given 1200 seconds. So it comes to be 0.17 watt. Because it's a power, so its unit is watt or joule per second. So I simply write here the rate of transfer of gravitational potential energy is 0.17 watt. Part B. The light output of the LED is 0.10 watt. Calculate the efficiency of the gravity lamp. Here we have to calculate the efficiency, and we know that efficiency is the ratio of output power to input power. Here light output is given. It means that the output is 0.10 watt, and in the last part we have calculated the power, that is input power, and it is 0.17 watt. We use this value as the input power and the value of output power is 0.10 to calculate the efficiency. So I write here efficiency is equal to output power divided by input power multiplied by 100, that is the percentage efficiency. So output is given 0.10 watt and the input power that we calculate is 0.17. So I write here 0.17 multiplied by 100, which is the efficiency. So efficiency comes to be 59%. I write here 59%. Part C. Suggest a social or environmental advantage of using a gravity lamp. So in this figure you can see that here is a gravity lamp and we don't need to use electricity or fuel for the LED, that is light emitting diode. It is just like converting the gravitational potential energy into electrical energy. So its basic advantage is that no use of the fossil fuel. I write here no use of fossil fuel. Question number 3, part A. A gas bubble is released at the bottom of lake. Atmospheric pressure is 1.0 into 10 की power 5 Pascal. The density of water is 1000 kilogram per meter cube. The temperature of water in the lake is constant. Here the temperature is kept constant. Atmospheric pressure and the density of water is given. Part 1. The gas bubble rises to the surface. The volume of the gas bubble increases as it rises higher in the water. Explain why the volume of the bubble increases. So first of all, I consider that it's a lake. And so there is an air bubble at the bottom of this lake. So we can see that we have to see that which pressure are exerted on the air bubble when it is at the bottom of this lake. So there are two pressure. First of all is atmospheric pressure, and second pressure on this air bubble is due to this water. So I write here the pressure on this air bubble when it is at the bottom of the lake is the sum of atmospheric pressure and the pressure of water. So total pressure at bottom will be equal to atmospheric pressure plus pressure of water. When this air bubble rises and comes on the surface of lake, then there is only one pressure that is acting on this, which is the atmospheric pressure. So the pressure at top will be equal to atmospheric pressure. From this equation we can see that the pressure at the top is smaller as compared to the pressure at the bottom. I write here pressure at top is smaller as compared to pressure at bottom. But in the question we have to tell that why the volume of the bubble increases. So we have to tell about the volume, and the temperature is kept constant. So by using Boyle's law, in Boyle's law, the pressure is inversely proportional to volume and keeping the temperature constant. In this question, temperature is also kept constant. We have to calculate the volume when the pressure is at the top is smaller as compared to bottom. So I write here when the pressure at the top is smaller as compared to bottom, then the volume at the top must be larger as compared to the bottom. So I write here volume at the top will be greater than the volume at bottom. That's why when this bubble rises and come on the surface of this lake, then the volume increases because here pressure is just the atmospheric pressure. So I write here pressure decreases as the air bubble rises, and as pressure is inversely proportional to volume, by keeping temperature constant, which is according to Boyle's law. So volume will increase as pressure decreases. That's why the volume at the surface of this lake is larger as compared to at the bottom. Part 2. The volume of the gas bubble is 0.40 cubic centimeter when it is 3.0 meter below the surface of lake. Calculate the volume of the gas bubble when it is 0.50 meter below the surface of the lake. So here we have to calculate the volume. First of all, I consider two levels of lake. First is this and second is this. And the height of this is 3.0 meters. So this height is basically 3.0 meter. I consider it H1, and at that height the volume is 0.40 centimeter cube. So at a height 0.50 meter below the surface of the lake, we have to calculate the volume. Now I consider the second level, that is 0.50 meters. This is H2, 0.5 meters, and here we have to calculate the volume. By using Boyle's law, we know that P1 V1 is equal to P2 V2. We don't know the value of pressure here. We have to calculate this, and the value of pressure at the bottom of the lake will be the sum of atmospheric pressure and the pressure due to water. So first of all, we calculate it. Total pressure will be equal to atmospheric pressure plus pressure due to fluid. In this case, the fluid is water. And the fluid pressure is rho GH. Rho is density, G is acceleration due to gravity, and H is height. So the atmospheric pressure is given, which is 1.0 into 10 ki power 5 plus rho is 1000 multiplied by the value of G is 10, and here H is height. When we have to calculate pressure P1, then we use the value of height 3 meter. When we have to calculate P2, then we have to use the value of H2. So P1 will be equal to 1.0 into 10 ki power 5 plus 1000 multiplied by 10 multiplied by 3, and P2 will be equal to 1.0 into 10 ki power 5 plus 1000 multiplied by 10 and 0.5. So these are the pressures. Now here we have to calculate the value of V2. By putting values here, we get V2 is equal to, first of all, put values. P1 is given 1.0 into 10 ki power 5 plus 1000 multiplied by 10 and 3, and the volume at this level is 0.40. It will be equal to pressure P2 1.0 into 10 ki power 5 plus 1000 multiplied by 10 and 0.5. We have to calculate this volume V2. So V2 comes to be 1.0 into 10 की power 5 plus 1000 multiplied by 10 and 3 multiplied by 0.40 divided by 1.0 into 10 की power 5 plus this is the total pressure, therefore I write here brackets. Ten multiplied by 1000 and 0.5. So here V2 comes to be 0.50 and the unit of volume is centimeter cube, so it will be centimeter cube. 0.50 centimeter cube. Next part. Part B. Figure 3.1 shows a diagram. Part B. Figure 5. This pressure produces an upward force on the piston wheel. As piston wheel moves, it compresses the paper. A small quantity of air leaks into the oil. Suggest and explain the effect the air has on the operation of the hydraulic press. So in the figure 3.1 you can see that there are two pistons A and B. This is piston A and this is piston B. We apply a force on the piston A, due to which this piston is moved downward and the volume here decreases. So I write here volume decrease. While this volume decrease, the pressure on the piston B increases and this piston move upward and there is a paper in this section due to which the paper is compressed. Or we can simply say that the energy that is applied by applying the force, it has to do two work. First, there are molecules of gas inside this and the energy that we supply here has to compress these molecules, that is air molecules, and also compress the paper. So all the energy that we supply is not used to compress the paper. Some of this energy is used to compress the oil molecules and some is used to compress the paper. That's why I write here paper is not compressed. As much as force applied. Sum of energy used to compress the air instead of paper. That's why paper is not completely compressed. Question number 4. Explain what happened to the pressure of a constant volume of air when the temperature of air is increases. Use idea of the momentum of molecules in your explanation. So here temperature increases and we have to tell that what happened to the pressure when the volume is constant. So first of all, when we increase the temperature, what will be the effect on pressure? So I consider that I have a gas and when I increase temperature, it means that I heat this, then its temperature increases. And when the temperature increases, then its kinetic energy also increases. Kinetic energy increase And we know that kinetic energy is equal to half mv squared. With the increase in kinetic energy, the velocity of molecules also increases. So I write here velocity increases. When kinetic energy of these molecules increases, then they collide with each other and also with the wall of container very rapidly. And when they collide with the wall of this container, they come back in the opposite direction. So there will be the change in momentum. So because the direction change involved here, there will be the change in momentum, and more change in momentum occur there because of the increase in kinetic energy. So more change in momentum. And when there will be the more change in momentum, then there will be the larger force. So the force also increases, and we know that pressure is equal to force per unit area. When force increases, pressure also increases. So in this way the pressure increases. I write here the temperature of air increases. So the kinetic energy of the molecules also increases. Molecules collide with wall of container cause change in momentum when temperature increases. Change in momentum also increases. And force increases, hence pressure will be high. So we can simply say that when temperature increases, pressure also increases. Question number 5, part A. An aluminium saucepan and a steel saucepan have the same dimensions. Table 5.1 shows the value of the specific heat capacity and the density of aluminium and steel. So in table 5.1 we can see that there are aluminium and steel, and the specific heat capacity and density of both are given. The specific heat capacity is given in joule per kg per degree C, while the density is taken in kilogram per meter cube. The mass of aluminium in saucepan is 0.41 kg. Part 1. Calculate the mass of the steel saucepan. So here we have to calculate the mass of steel saucepan. We know that here density is given, and we know that density is equal to mass per unit volume. We have to calculate mass. I write here mass will be equal to the product of density and volume. Here density is given, but we don't know what will be the volume of steel saucepan. So in the question part A, we can see that the aluminium saucepan and steel saucepan both have same dimension. It means that the volume of the steel saucepan and aluminium saucepan will be same. So I write here density for aluminium saucepan will be equal to mass of aluminium saucepan over volume of aluminium saucepan, and volume of aluminium saucepan is equal to volume of steel. So from here we calculate the volume. Volume of aluminium will be equal to density multiplied by mass divided by density. The mass of aluminium saucepan is given, that is 0.41 kg, over the density of aluminium is 2600. So the volume comes to be 0.41 over 2600. So here the volume of both of these saucepan is same. I write 0.41 over 2600. Now using this equation you can find out the mass of steel saucepan, and it will be equal to density for the steel is 7600 multiplied by volume is 0.41 over 2600. So the mass comes to be 1.2 kilogram, which is the mass of steel saucepan. I write here 1.2 kg. Part 2. Calculate the thermal capacity of the aluminium saucepan. Here we have to calculate the thermal capacity, and we know that thermal capacity Tc, it is equal to the product of mass and specific heat capacity C. Here in a table we are given specific heat capacity and mass of aluminium saucepan is given, so we can easily calculate the thermal capacity. It will be 0.41 multiplied by the aluminium has 0.91 specific heat capacity. So I write here 0.91 and it comes to be 0.37 joule per degree C. So thermal capacity will be equal to 0.37 joule per degree C. Next, part 3. Water is heated in the steel saucepan. The initial temperature of the water and the saucepan is 20 degrees C. Here initial temperature is given, that is 20 degrees C. Calculate the energy transfer needed to raise the temperature of steel saucepan to 100 degrees C. So we have to calculate the energy transfer that is needed to raise the temperature from 20 to 100 degrees C. So I write here energy transfer E. It is equal to the product of mass and change in temperature delta T. So mass for the steel saucepan is 1.2 kg, that we already calculate. So I put here 1.2 multiplied by change in temperature, it will be 100 minus 20. So this temperature is basically in degrees C, and the energy comes to be 48 joule. So the energy transfer is actually 48 joules. Part B. Explain why metals are better thermal conductors than non-metals. So we know that in a metal there are large number of free electrons and they move freely. That's why it's easy for conduction in the metal as compared to non-metal. So I write here metals have more free electrons. That's why metals are thermal conductor. Question number 6, part A. Describe an experiment to determine the speed of sound in air. State the apparatus you need. details of how to take measurements and how to calculate the speed of sound in air. You may use the space below to draw a label diagram as part of your answer. So here we have to describe the experiment that is used to calculate the speed of sound in air. For this we need different things. First of all, we have an observer at one end that produces the sound, and there will be a wall that must be reflecting on the other end. So first of all, I draw here is the observer. This observer produces the sound, and there is a wall at the other end, and the distance between them is x. So this wall should be reflecting surface. So I draw here as and write it's a reflecting surface. The distance between the observer and the reflecting surface is x. I label it as x. So this is the distance between these, and it is equal to x. Secondly, we know that the speed is equal to distance over time. For the calculation of speed of sound, we need two things. First, the distance, and second is time. So to measure the time, we use the timer. So I place timer here. I label it timer. And there is also a ruler that is used to measure the length. So I place it as it's a ruler or tape that is used to measure length, and it is also calibrated, so we can easily find out the distance between both of these, observer and the surface. There is calibration inside this. So I write here, it's a measuring tape. It is used to find the distance between the observer that emits the sound wave and the reflecting surface. So in this experiment, first of all, the observer produces the sound, and these sound waves travels towards the reflecting surface just like this. The sound wave travels from the observer to the reflecting surface, and then these waves must be reflected from the surface and come back. Then when they come back, they will be just like this. So it's incoming sound wave, and these are back going sound wave. So by the help of measuring tape, we can find out the distance between them. And when these sound waves reflected, then the observer hears the echo, and we have to on the timer when the observer emits the sound wave and off it when he hears echo. And by timer we can easily measure the time, and by measuring tape we can easily calculate the distance between both of these, and by using v is equal to t over t we can find out the speed of sound in the air. So we have to follow the different steps, and the distance between observer and the reflecting surface is x, But the sound wave covers double distance of x, because first of all it is deflecting and then it comes back. So here distance t will be equal to 2 and x, and time we measure it with the help of timer. So I write here observer produces sound or person produces sound and after reflection from surface, it comes back and he hear echo. Echo is actually the reflection of sound. Start the timer. When person produce sound, and stop it when he heard echo. Measure distance traveled by the sound using meter rule or using measuring tape, and then speed comes to be, it will be equal to total distance traveled, which is 2 multiplied by the distance between person and wall. And divide this total distance by time. So in this way we calculate the speed of sound. Part B. Sound waves from the television are diffracted through doorways. Light waves from the television are not diffracted through doorways. Suggest why light waves and sound wave behave differently in this situation. So the sound wave diffracted, but light wave do not suffer diffraction. We have to explain the reason that why both of these behave differently. So first of all, we have to know that when diffraction occurs, when the wavelength of light it will be equal to the door wave width. When the wavelength of the sound is equal to doorway's width, then the sound wave or any wave get diffracted. No, in the case of sound wave has much larger wavelength as compared to the doorway width. That's why they get diffracted. But light waves have much smaller wavelength as compared to the doorway width. That's why they do not diffracted. I write here wavelength of sound is equal to or it is greater than the doorway width. But the wavelength of light is much less than this width. That's why the sound waves get diffracted but light waves do not diffracted. I write here wavelength should be equal to width of the gap for maximum diffraction. So in our case, the wavelength of sound wave is similar to the width of doorway. But for light waves, wavelength is smaller. As compared to the width of doorway. That's why the sound waves diffracted while the light waves do not diffracted. Question number 7, part A. Figure 7.1 shows a ray of green light emerging from one face of glass prism. So here is a figure 7.1 and a ray of green light is emerging from this glass prism. Part 1. On figure 7.1, draw the path of green light entering and passing through the prism. So we have to draw the path of the green light when it enters the prism and passing through it. So first of all, in this figure we can see that there is air and prism. It means that this prism are higher density, while the outside of this prism there will be the smaller density. So the prism acts as a denser medium, while the outside of prism there is a rare medium. And we know that when a ray of light goes from denser to rare medium, it bends away from the normal. I write here, when ray of light goes from denser to rare medium, it bends away from normal. Normal I represent it with n. So in such a way that the angle of incidence is less than angle of refraction. Second case is that when a ray of light goes from rare to denser medium, then it bends towards the normal in such a way that angle of incidence is larger as compared to angle of refraction. I write here second case, when ray of light goes from rare to denser medium, it bends towards normal in such a way that angle of incidence is larger as compared to angle of refraction. So here we have to use these two concepts. First of all, I draw the ray that is passing through the prism, and after that I draw the incident ray. To draw the ray that is passing through the prism, first of all I have to draw the normal on this prism surface. So I draw the normal on this surface. The normal to this surface will be at this point, and I represent it with this one. Here green light is used, that's why I use green one. So this is normal to this surface. So from here we can see that this ray comes from the denser medium and then enters into the rare medium. So there will be the case among these two. As the ray enters from denser to rare medium, there will be case 1 that it will bend away from normal. It means that if this is a normal, then the incident ray must be bent away from this normal. I draw it as the incident ray must be just like this, because it has to bend away from the normal such that this is the angle of incident that is made between the normal ray and incident ray. So this is angle of incidence while this is angle of refraction. So here we can see that the angle of incidence is much smaller as compared to angle of refraction. So I draw the ray that is passing through the prism. Secondly, I have to draw the ray that is incident ray, that incident on the prism. To draw this ray, again I use the same concept. First of all, I draw the normal ray. Then I set that the ray enters from rare to denser medium and it will bend towards the normal in such a way that the angle of incidence must be larger as compared to angle of refraction. So first of all, I draw the normal to this surface. So it's the normal to this surface. Now I represent it with N. Here is a second case that ray entered from this medium into this. It means that the ray of light entered from rare medium to denser medium. So this must bend towards the normal. When I draw this ray, I have to bend it towards the normal. It will be just like this, such that the angle of incidence must be greater than the angle of refraction. So this will be the incident ray that is normal to this surface. So we can see from here that this is the incident angle for this incoming ray. I write here angle of incidence while this is the refraction angle. Here angle of incidence is greater than angle of refraction. So this condition is satisfied. And we know that angle of incidence is made between the incoming ray and the normal ray, while the angle of refraction made between the refracted ray and the normal ray. So this is the complete path when a green light enters the prism and passing through it, and then it gets diffracted and comes out of the prism. So we have completed the first part. Second part is that the green light is monochromatic. State in terms of wave property what is meant by the monochromatic light. So monochromatic light is that which has single frequency. We know that the green color has a specific value of frequency, so it's a monochromatic light. I write here light of single frequency. It is called monochromatic light. Part B. First, state the speed of light in air. So the speed of light is commonly 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. So I write here the speed of light is 3 into 10 की power 8 meter per second. Next part 2. The wavelength of the green light in air is 5.2 into 10 की power minus 7 meters. Calculate the frequency of the green light. Here we have to calculate the frequency of the green light, and its wavelength is 5.2 into 10 की power minus 7 meter, and it moves with the speed of light. So I write here, we know that V is equal to F lambda. From this relation, we can easily calculate the frequency. F is equal to V over lambda. The speed is 3 into 10 की power 8 and the wavelength is given 5.2 into 10 की power minus 7. So frequency comes to be 5.8 into 10 की power 14 Hertz. So the frequency is 5.8 into 10 की power 14 Hertz, that is for green light. Part 3. The refractive index of glass for green light is 1.52. Calculate the speed of green light in glass. Here we have to calculate the speed in glass. The refractive index is equal to, it is the ratio of the speed of light in air to the speed of light in any medium, and it is over V. Here medium is glass, so I write here speed in glass. Here we have to calculate V glass. It will be equal to C over N. The speed of light is 3 into 10 की power 8 divided by the refractive index is 1.52, and it comes to be 2.0 into 10 की power 8 meter per second. So the speed of green light in glass will be 2.0 into 10 की power 8 meter per second. Question number 8, part A. Figure 8.1 shows two charged metal plates with a gap between them. The plates are parallel to each other. The top plate is negatively charged and the bottom plate is positively charged. In the figure 8.1, we can see that there are two plates. The top plate is negatively charged while the bottom plate is positively charged. On figure 8.1, draw 5 electric field lines between two plates. Here we have to draw the 5 electric field lines. So first of all, we know that the electric field lines emerges from the positive charge and enters towards the negative charge. So I write here electric field lines emerges from positive charge and enters in negative charge. So in figure 8.1, we can see that the top plate has negative charge while the bottom plate has positive charge. So the electric field lines will be from positive to negative. It means that from bottom to top. So I draw them. This is first line. This is second line. Third one. Fourth, and this is last one. We also have place arrow to show its direction. So these are the electric field lines between two plates. Part B. An electric iron has a power of 2400 watt. The potential difference PD of the main supply is 220 volt. Part 1. Calculate the electric current in the iron. Here we have to calculate the electric current. Power is given and potential difference is given. We know that power is the product of current and potential difference. Here we have to calculate the current. So I write I is equal to P over V. Power is given 2400 and potential difference is 220. So the current comes to be 11 amperes. So I write here 11 amperes. Part 2. Calculate the electric charge which flows through the iron in 15 minutes. Here we have to calculate the electric charge when time is 15 minutes. We already calculate the current values. We can define the electric current as I is equal to rate of flow of charges. So I write here Q over T, where Q is electric charge and T is time. Here we have to calculate Q, that is electric charge. It will be the product of current and time. So the electric current is 11 multiplied by time is 15. First of all, we have convert this 15 minutes into second. So time will be equal to 15 minutes and 15 multiplied by 60 will be equal to 900 seconds. So I multiply this with 900 and the charges comes to be 9900 coulombs. The unit of charge is coulomb. So it will be equal to 9900 coulombs. Part 3. Fuse rating of 3 ampere, 5 ampere, 10 ampere, 13 ampere and 30 amperes are available. State which one of the following fuse rating is suitable for use in the iron. So first of all, we see the value of current that is passing through the iron. It is given, that is 11 amperes. So any fuse rating whose value of current is less than this value is not suitable, and for the suitable fuse the value of the current will be equal to the fuse rating. So here we can see that 3 ampere is very small amount of current as compared to 11 ampere. So 5 ampere is also be very small, 10 ampere is small and 13 ampere is suitable because it is very close to 11 ampere. So 30 ampere is very high value. So I write fuse rating must be equal to 13 ampere. Question number 9. Figure 9.1 shows current potential difference graph for a resistor, thermistor and a filament lamp. So here is the current potential difference graph. We can see that current is taken into amperes and it is on y-axis, while the potential difference is taken along x-axis and it is measured in volts. The resistor, the thermistor and the filament lamp are connected in series with the power supply. Part A 1. Draw a circuit diagram for this circuit. So we have to draw the circuit in which there is a resistor, thermistor and filament lamp. All of these are connected in series with the power supply. So first of all, we have to know the symbols of all of these. The power supply is represented by this symbol. It has two terminals, one is positive and other is negative, while the filament lamp is represented by this symbol. And the thermistor is just like a resistor with small change, that its resistance value is not fixed, and the symbol of resistor is this one. Now we are going to draw the circuit for this. So all of these are connected in series. Here we make the power supply that has one positive terminal and other is negative. So it's a power supply. Now the resistor, thermistor and filament lamp, all of three components are connected in series with power supply. So we have to connect the resistor first of all. So this component is a resistor. This one is thermistor. And at that place we have draw filament lamp. Here we can see that this is the power supply and three components, resistor, thermistor and filament, these are connected in series because there is only one path for the flow of current. So second part, add a voltmeter to your circuit diagram in A part 1 in a correct position to measure the potential difference across the resistor. Here we have to measure the potential difference across the resistor and add a voltmeter. To measure the potential difference, the voltmeter is always connected in parallel. So when we have to draw the voltmeter and we have to measure the potential difference across the resistor, it should be connected in parallel. So I am going to connect this. It's a voltmeter and it is connected in parallel with the resistor. Part 3. Using the graph in figure 9.1, determine the potential difference across the terminals of power supply when the potential difference across the resistor is 6.0 volt. Here the potential difference across the resistor is 6 volt and we have to calculate the potential difference across the terminals of power supply. It means that we have to calculate the total potential difference. This V we have to calculate. And the resistor has potential difference 6.0 volt. So going back to the graph, here we can see that 6 volt is at that point. We have to calculate its corresponding current and we drop this line on the y-axis. And this gives the current values, that is 0.4. So when potential difference, I suppose it is equal to V1, it is 6.0 volt. The current is 0.4 volt. Now we know the value of potential difference and current. So first of all, we know that in series and parallel combination, the potential difference across the series combination is different, while in parallel combination potential difference remains same. For current, in series combination current is same, while in parallel combination current is different. Here we have calculated that the current through the resistor is 0.4 amperes. It's not volt, it is ampere. Now we can see in the diagram that the resistor, thermistor and filament lamp are connected in series. That's why the current through all of these components remains same. And the current through all components will be 0.4 ampere. So we have to find out the corresponding values of potential difference for all of these components. We know that the potential difference for resistor is 6.0 volt. Now we have to calculate the potential difference values across the filament lamp and thermistor. For that we join this line with the thermistor at this point. And then join this on x-axis. Now we can see that this is the value of potential difference across the thermistor and it comes to be 9 volt. I write here V thermistor is equal to, suppose that it is equal to V2 and it is 9 volt. Now we have to calculate the value of potential difference across the filament lamp. At 0.4 ampere, this curve touches at this point. So join this with x-axis. We can see that the value of current at this point, the value of potential difference at this point is 3 volt. So this is basically the potential difference across the filament lamp. So I write here it is V3 and it is equal to 3 volt. And in series combination, the potential difference is different, but the total current is same. Now we have to calculate the total potential difference. It will be equal to the sum of all of these values. So I write here V is equal to V1 plus V2 plus V3. It will be equal to 6.0, 9 volt plus 3 volt and it comes to be 18 volt. So this is the potential difference across the terminals of power supply. So I write here, the current in the circuit is 0.4 ampere. As same current flows through all components, so the potential difference across thermistor it will be equal to 9 volt. The potential difference across filament lamp it will be equal to 3 volt. Now we have to calculate the potential difference across the terminals of power supply. It will be equal to the sum of the potential difference across three components. So I write here 6 plus 9 plus 3, it will be equal to 18 volt. So the potential difference across terminal of power supply is 18 volts. Part B. Describe a practical use for a thermistor. We know that thermistor resistance is not fixed and it changes with the change in temperature. So we can use this in fire alarms. So I write here fire alarms. Question number 10, part A. A transformer has 500 turns on the primary coil and 25 turns on the secondary coil. The input voltage is 120 volt. Part 1. Calculate the output voltage. So in the part 1 we have to calculate the output voltage where the number of turns on primary and secondary are given and the input voltage is also given. So we know that the ratio of the voltage is equal to the ratio of number of turns. I can simply write as Ns over Np, that is turn ratio. Turn ratio of secondary to primary will be equal to the voltage across secondary to voltage across primary. Here we have to calculate the output voltage. It means that we have to calculate the secondary voltage. It will be equal to Ns Vp over Np. So number of turns in the secondary is given 25 and the input voltage is 120 volt. And the number of turns on the primary coil is 500. So the output voltage comes to be 6.0 volt. I write here output voltage is equal to 6.0 volt. Part 2. The current in the primary coil is 125 milliampere. The transformer is 100% efficient. Calculate the output current. So here we are given the input current, that is the current of primary, it is equal to 125 milliampere and efficiency is also given, that is 100%. We have to calculate the output current. 100% efficient means that the power that we supply must be equal to the power that we gain. It means that the input power must be equal to output power. When a transformer is 100% efficient, I write here output power will be equal to input power. And input power is product of input voltage and input current. It will be equal to V naught I naught. Here we have to calculate the output current. So I naught will be equal to VI I over V naught. So the input voltage is given in the question, that is 120 volt. I write here 120 multiplied by input current is 125 milliamperes. So first of all we have to convert milliamperes into ampere. That's why I multiply it with 10 to the power minus 3 divided by output power that we calculate is 6.0 volt. So the output current comes to be 2.5 amperes. So I write here 2.5 ampere. Part B. Figure 10.1 shows a loose wire connected in a circuit with a DC direct current power supply and a switch. So here we can see in a figure 10.1 that this is a wire, and this wire is suspended between the magnetic field. Here north and south poles are the magnet of magnetic field. These are the poles of magnetic field, and both of these wires are connected with the DC power supply and switch. The length of the wire between the two spots is in the magnetic field of the horseshoe magnet. The power supply is switched on and the wire moves down. On figure 10.1, draw an arrow on the wire to show the direction of current. Here we have to show the direction of current. So in this wire, the direction of current will be from right to left. So first of all we have to know that how the direction of current is determined. For this we use the Fleming left hand rule, and here we are given that the wire moves down. It means that force is acting on the wire in downward direction. So the force is acting in the downward direction and the magnetic field is from north to south pole. So I write here force is downward and the magnetic field is from north to south pole. It means that the magnetic field is into the page. Now we have to find out the direction of current. For that we use the Fleming left hand rule. According to Fleming left hand rule, if I consider my left hand and arrange second finger, third finger and thumb mutually perpendicular to each other, then my thumb shows the direction of force. When second finger points in the direction of magnetic field, B is for magnetic field, and the third finger will point in the direction of current. So when we apply the Fleming left hand rule, I point my thumb in the direction of force and the second finger in the direction of magnetic field. Then there will be the direction of current that flows from right to left. So the current flows from right to left. I write here so in this way we can calculate the direction of current. And this arrow basically shows that current is flowing from right to left. Part 2. The power supply is switched off and the wire returns to its original position. The power supply is then switched on so that the current in the opposite direction. State and explain what happened to the wire. So here first of all power supply is switched off and then power supply is switched on and the current flows in the opposite direction. First of all current is from right to left. Now we have reverse its direction and it will flow from left to right. So what will happen? Here we can see that the direction of current is reverse so that the force direction also be reverses. So when the current flows from left to right and magnetic field is into the page, then by using the Fleming left hand rule we find out the direction of force. First of all it is downward, but in this case when the direction of current is reverse, the force will be opposite direction and it will be upward. So we can simply say that by reversing the direction of current, the force also reverses. I write here wire will move upward so you also have to describe its reason. The reversing direction of current reverses the direction of force. Part C. A split ring commutator is an important feature of DC motor. Suggest one reason why the DC motor cannot operate without split ring commutator. So the coil does not continue to rotate in the same direction. That's why the DC motor cannot operate without a split ring commutator. I write here, coil does not continue to rotate in same direction. Question number 11, part A. A detector of radioactivity is placed in a laboratory where there are no radioactive samples. A student notices that the detector shows count rate that varies between 20 counts per minute and 24 counts per minute. So the count rate is not constant here, it varies between 20 to 24 counts per minute. Part 1. Suggest a source of these readings. As there is no radioactive sample placed near the detector in the laboratory, but there is still count rate. So it is basically due to the background radiation that is present in the atmosphere. So I write here background radiation. Part 2. Explain why these readings are not constant. As in the question, it is said that the count rate varies between 20 to 24 counts per minute. So here we have to tell that why these readings are not constant. So radioactive decay is a random process, we cannot predict it. That's why there is a variation in count rate. I write here radioactive decay is random. Part B. A nucleus of uranium contains 92 protons, 146 neutrons. It decays by emitting an alpha particle to become a nucleus of thorium-10. complete the nuclide equation for this radioactive decay. So here we have to complete this equation, and it is given in the question that the number of protons are 92 and the number of neutrons are 146 for uranium. So at that place we write the atomic number that is equal to the number of protons, and at the top we write the atomic mass, that is the sum of number of protons and neutrons. So for the uranium nucleus we are given that 92 protons and 146 neutrons. So I write here, as the number of proton is equal to atomic number, so it will be 92. But atomic mass is the sum of number of protons plus number of neutrons. Protons are 92 plus neutrons are 146. That's why the atomic number of uranium is 238. So I write here 238. On the right hand side we can see that there are two symbols, TH and alpha. We know that alpha particles are helium nuclei and atomic number is 2 while the mass number is 4. So I write here atomic number is 2 and mass number is 4, and we have to write the atomic number and atomic mass of thorium. For that we use the law of conservation of charges. It means that the number of protons and the number of neutrons on both sides must be same. So first of all I check the number of protons. On left hand side I write here left hand side, right hand side, protons first of all. So here we can see that 92 protons on left hand side, and on right hand side there are two number of protons. So I add 90 here so that the number of protons on both sides are equal. So I write here 90. That is the number of protons of thorium. We also have to know about the mass number. I write here mass number A. On the left hand side it is 238 and on the right hand side it is 4 plus. Which number I have to add there so that it becomes 238? It should be 234. So I write here 234. So we have completed this equation for this radioactive decay when the uranium decays into thorium and alpha particles. Part C. An isotope of radon has a half-life of 3.8 days. It decays by emitting alpha radiation. Calculate the time taken for 16 mg of this isotope to decay to 2 mg of the isotope. So here we are given that the half-life is 3.8 days and this radon gas decays by emitting alpha particles. We have to calculate the total time taken by the radon gas when its amount decreased from 16 mg to 2 mg. So first of all, we have to calculate the total number of half-life. Half-life is a time during which half of the element of the radioactive decay decrease. So I write here, initially there are 16 mg of radon gas. When first half-life pass, it becomes 16 over 2, 8 mg after first half-life. Now when again one half-life pass, then half of the 8 mg decays. It means that 8 mg decays and it becomes 4 mg. But we have to decrease this amount by 2 mg. So again one half-life pass and 4 mg decays again and it becomes 2 mg. Here we can see that total 3 half-life passes. So I write here total half-lives required to decay from 16 mg to 8 mg to mg is 3. So the total time taken will be equal to, there are total 3 half-life and 1 half-life is equal to 3.8 days. So I multiply it with 3.8 days and it comes to be 11.4 days. So the time will be equal to 11.4